Is Canon's new action priority autofocus just hype or a game changer? Let's dive in. So when Canon announced the new R5 Mark II and the R1, it talked about a lot of things. The image sense, the ergonomics, the eye control autofocus. But it didn't talk a lot about this, the action priority autofocus mode. It's a totally new thing, and it was kind of just a footnote in the announcement. Action priority autofocus is basically a completely new way of looking at autofocus. In using deep learning AI to look at specific sports and set up the camera for a way that best reflects that sport, and to let the camera decide what it should focus on. Think of it as Tesla's self-driving mode, but if you're a camera, you control the composition, the camera will take care of the autofocus. Now in the past, Canon has not given us a lot of information about what's actually happening with autofocus. The manuals have always been pretty thin when it comes to autofocus and what should be the best settings depending on what we're trying to accomplish. That is until now. As I was working on trying to figure out the best way to use this autofocus mode, and I came across a completely separate document which is called the Autofocus Setting Guide. Now, it's been a long time since Canon has done something like this that explains in depth everything that is happening with the autofocus, what the camera is looking for, how you should best adjust your settings for the sport you're trying to shoot. I highly recommend that anybody that shoots with the R5 Mark II and is going to use the R1 read through the entirety of this manual. It is amazing. So much good information. Let's look through the section on action priority mode because it explains everything. All right, let's take a look at this autofocus setting guide. Here in the overview, you kind of see all of the things that we'll cover, but we're going to look specifically at action priority mode. So let's jump down to the action priority menu and look at the overview. And this really explains what the camera does. This function selects people performing actions unique to soccer or football, basketball and volleyball, and prioritizes them as a main subject. With this function, the camera recognizes people performing actions unique, soccer, basketball, and volleyball, shooting, spiking, etc., and prioritizes them as a main subject. Now that's really important. The key phrase here is performing an action. When I initially heard about the action priority mode, I thought it just was basically whoever's closest to the ball is going to be in focus. But that's not true. It's a combination of where the ball's at and who is performing an action specific to that sport. Also really important to note here is when they're performing a continuous action such as dribbling, the camera will continue to track them with better accuracy than normal tracking. And that's something that we have seen in our testing to be true. So let's take a look at each sport. First of all, with soccer, or football worldwide as it's known, here are the actions that it can handle. It will recognize a player that's shooting, doing a header, making a short pass, a long pass, dribbling down the field, clearing the ball, doing a place kick, a goalkeeper save, throwing in the ball, or a sliding tackle. So essentially everything but the manager throwing a tantrum. For basketball, action priority mode can recognize somebody that's shooting the ball, rebounding the ball, passing the ball, dribbling the ball, doing a free throw, or a jump ball, which is pretty comprehensive of basketball. And finally for volleyball, anybody making a spike, a toss, a receive, or a serve. Now notably missing here is a block, and we'll get into that later. On the second menu, it goes into how to set it up, the instructions to get it set up, which are pretty basic, but it's really important to know that you can assign a button to enable or disable action priority, and we've actually done that. On our camera, we use the record button to turn it on and off, and you'll want to do that because there are times when the situations where action priority mode is not the best solution. I also think it's really important to look at this caution here. Action priority settings are not available when you're doing movie recording, when shutter mode is set to mechanical or electronic first curtain, when subject to detect is set to anything other than people, or when high frame rate anti-flicker shooting is set to enable. You cannot use action priority mode in any of these instances. So with action priority mode, this is what's happening inside your camera. If a subject performing an action is recognized during standby while using servo autofocus, including during shooting, continuous shooting with servo AF, the camera selects them as the main subject. And that's even if it's tracking another subject, the frame will switch to the subject performing the action. And even if there's a registered person that's detected, it will switch to the person performing the action. During servo autofocus, after switching the subject performing the action, the camera continues tracking them even after the action is completed. So after they've taken a shot, it will stay with them. But if the camera sees another subject doing another action, one of those recognized actions, it will switch to them. So it's really important to understand what's in your frame can be tracked. All right, so here's some tips for using this mode. One of them is to shoot a large image of the subject in action, make them a big prominent part of your focus, and then they are the one making action with the ball. Or make sure that the entire body of the subject is captured. Now in testing, I didn't find that was necessary, but I can understand what they're saying. The camera is recognizing, it's looking for shapes of the motion. So if it can see the full body, it'll probably be more effective. Also shooting in a well-lit environment. But I felt really instructive was this. The following kinds of subjects may not be recognized as priority subjects based on their movement. Small subjects, things that are too bright or too dark, things that are partially hidden or outside an angle of view, things that are hard to distinguish from the background, things that are obscured by rain, snow, or dust clouds, or if they're wearing a uniform that makes it hard to determine their posture, so they're blending into the background. When there's a lot of athletes crowded together in front or behind of each other, in scenes where the ball is not visible or partly visible, which tells you that the ball is key to making this work. Things that are really out of focus and under really heavy flickering light sources. One more thing I wanted to highlight was some of usage examples that explains different situations and what the best practices are for those. And it wasn't until we found this manual that I learned this. For the most part, in our testing, we've been shooting holding down the continuous tracking and letting the camera jump around and choose focus. But one of the things that it says here in this hint is that if you do it, if you start your focus right before the shot or the movement begins, it'll be more accurate. So it's something I need to test now that I've read through this manual and kind of gotten that insight. But I do believe it does work both ways. But it's well worth reading through this entire manual, especially the action priority section. And in fact, there's one more thing that I thought was really interesting. Here in the end, it gives you settings depending upon the sport. So if you've ever wanted to shoot, horse racing, I like it how each one of these got their own little drawing. It'll give you recommended settings for your autofocus to work with horse racing. Now that's not just action priority specific, that's just for all of your autofocus settings. So lucky for us, my daughter happens to have a soccer game tonight, so I'm going to test out action priority mode in soccer. The only problem is I'm going to record in the Ninja, which means that there's an HDMI coming to the Ninja and it disables the viewfinder. So I've got to do all my following and focusing on the Ninja screen, which is going to be a little shaky, not my normal steady self. Brace yourself. Things are about to get shaky. All right, let's check out the footage here. Here's just warm-ups and it's showing you exactly what's happening. I'm holding down the focus button and the camera is jumping between the people that it thinks it should be tracking. And in here, the girls that are in possession have the ball, and when the possession switches, it switches to that new person. Quickly gets the shot off. That happened really fast, so let's slow it down and take a look at it. I can't find where she's at. The camera finds her, focuses on her, and gets the shot. And that just happens in a fraction of a second. That is super impressive that it was able to do that. And then it will stick with her as the celebration happens. And here it switches back and forth a little bit because it's not quite sure who it should be focusing on. Whenever you get involved in youth sports, there's always that one dad that's a little too over-prepared. That's me. Here's another example. Watch who it's tracking, and then when possession switches, it switches to the other girl. Same thing here. Possession switches, she kicks it down forward, and the ball's focusing on the person closest to the ball. And then once it recognizes possession changes, it will change back as there's jostling for it. She'll cut in right here and take the ball away. And it goes back to her. Same thing. They're just jostling for control, and the camera is focusing on who it believes is in control. Right here, it's going to get stolen. And then it switches to that girl that stole the ball, and another pass. And again, the camera's a little lost here a second, but then it finds who it thinks has control. Possession switches to the new girl. I'm not doing any of this. The camera is choosing who to focus on. And it's not perfect, but it does a really good job. Nice long pass here. She thinks she's in possession, so it's going to focus on her. But then right here, the ball's going to get stolen. And watch it switch right there, and it switches possession. Here's a little fast break. Tracks her really well throughout the whole thing. Everything's sharp. Stays with her after the shot. And again, one more shot. It is so hard to keep this steady and to pan. I don't know how video operators can do it. All right, let's run through these images real quick. These are all just the raw files. And again, the sharpness is pretty darn good. We'll run through a few of the sequences that we showed in the video. You see how the focus jumps right there to her. And she's driving down the field, stays in focus with her. And then right here you see the focus will switch when the ball gets stolen. Now it's on the girl in black. And those are jostling for control. The camera's going to make adjustments. All right, here's a good sequence. Now, what I don't understand here is she's totally, the girl in white's in focus, and then all of a sudden it jumps to the girl in black. And I think that has something to do with the fact that she's coming right at the camera or the high contrast. I'm not sure. But it does jump to her, but it does come back here, right there. And then it does a really good job from that point on. Just look at that focus on them. Defender gets the inside track on the ball, gets possession, focus jumps to her. Attacker's going to try and fight for it. And right back here, she gets possession of the ball, and it focuses right back on her. And I'm just super impressed with how good of a job it does at soccer and switching. And at first, I wasn't sure if I could trust it, but it's totally usable. Here's that fast break, just tracking the attacker. And this is the point where you worry about it jumping to the background or whatnot, but no, this is solid. Stays right with her, and then look at the shot. Stays. Sometimes when a ball is flying through the air, the focus gets jumpy. But with this soccer mode, action priority mode, it does a really good job of sticking with the person that shot the ball, especially because it can't see the ball, and it just tracks her as she turns back around. This sequence is crazy. So what's happening here is she's going to run through this attack, but then cross behind the net of the goal. And watch this. I just thought, oh, focus is gone. But nope. It's just staying on her. And look, through her entire shot, it stays on her. In fact, you can come back here. We'll zoom in. And look at that. She is in focus. And it's obviously it feels soft because you're shooting through a net. But no, she is in focus. And for tracking, to be able to track her all the way through this sequence, and it doesn't leave her. Even when this girl crosses in front of her, look. Still in focus, still in focus, still in focus. And then as she exits, I think I hit the buffer right here. She's going to exit the net and then go celebrate. Just fine. Does a great job of tracking her. All right, let's try basketball. Basketball's out of season, so we went to a practice and we're able to get some shots of them just doing their thing. Basketball's crazy. It moves fast, and trying to see if the camera can keep up with who has the ball. And initially I'm really impressed with some of the things that it can do. I missed my shot here, but the camera got him in focus. Does a great job tracking. Here's a dunk. Watch him come right at the hoop. No problem. Sticks with him. And then look at this clip. Just so much movement across the court, passes around. In fact, it's just hard to tell what's going on. So it finishes off with this crossover. And again, we're going to slow this down so you can see exactly what happened, where the camera is seeing. Jumps focus to the person that has the ball. He crosses in front. He jumps up and does a pass, and it's going to look for who has the ball. It mistakes for the guy in the foreground immediately, but then as soon as it gets on him, it's on the shooter. Shooter takes the shot and misses, but look how quickly it gets to the rebounder. And then right here, this is where head tracking usually fails, when you cross in front of another head. And you briefly will do that, but then right here, it jumps back, goes with him, and stays with him through the shot. That's impressive. First of all, we're going to show an instance where the camera fails. You can see as he turns around, he's in focus, everything's fine. As he turns around, you're going to see the focus be there, be there, be there, be there, be there, and then jump to the background. Now, why did it jump to the guy sitting in the background? Well, the reason is for a few frames here, the ball is obscured. And if the ball is obscured for a certain amount of time, the camera, it's just will immediately go and look for the ball. So it must have thought that the ball was passed back here to him, and so it's going to focus on him. And that's one thing I've noticed about action priority mode. It's always hunting for the ball. And if there's times where the ball is obscured, which in basketball is going to happen, I think it's too quick to jump away from that. I need to play with my settings on autofocus to see if I myself can delay how quickly it tries to switch and find the ball, or we need to find out if that's something that the algorithm can improve. But I just feel like it's a little too quick to jump away from the subject, because the subject didn't really move that much. He's in focus. As you see right here, he's pretty much close to the same place, and he's a lot closer than the guy in the background. So it's something to look at. But it did struggle, and it wasn't sure what to do once it had two basketballs. But again, in a game situation, you're not going to run into that. Here's a good example, driving to the paint, and you're going to see his arm crosses in front of his face. No problem. Stays on focus. Everything's great. Good job tracking. It's making it sharp. Here's an example of a dunk. A little late to get to it, but it was fine. The camera was ready. It is so fast to acquire focus. It really is amazing. And you see it just goes through the sequence and no problem. All right, here we're going to start getting into some chaos as he's crossing the arms and legs of other players. And you can kind of see right here, he's going to jump up and do a pass. He's still in focus. And then right about here, it jumps to the defender. It's not sure what's going on. But then it gets back on the pass. And he's going to pass it to his teammate, who's going to grab the ball to be out of focus. But then by the time he gets to his shot, and we are definitely out of practice because we're cut off his hand. But we get there eventually. By the time he actually does take the shot, we're fine. We're in focus, no problem. Now we have a guard driving through a bunch of bodies here, and you're going to look at the focus on the guard with the ball. He's in focus, he's obscured, but he's still in focus, still in focus, still in focus, still in focus. As he crosses this defender, still in focus, although you don't see his eyes, still in focus, still in focus, still in focus. As he goes up for a dunk, crosses past him, still in focus. We're out of practice. Can't cut his hand off, but we get there eventually. And he takes the shot. So many obstacles, that's something that traditional autofocus or head tracking would not be able to handle. Here's the straight-on version of that. Much easier without all the bodies crossing. But he's moving fast, and it's doing a great job of tracking him and staying with him through the play. Over the years, I've taught all my students how to shoot a bunch of different sports, and without a doubt, the hardest sport they think to learn how to photograph is volleyball. Autofocus is tough. Things move fast. There's things in the way. They always struggle with volleyball, especially the new shooters. So I asked one of my students to take the R5 Mark II to a volleyball game and try it out in action priority mode. And the next day I ran into her and I asked her, hey, how'd it go? And she said, magical. So let's see what the magic is. Going to change my setting to volleyball. And action and priority enabled. And there's just a few shots just showing what it can do. Again, digging, tracking the hit, staying with her pretty good, although I did let go of focus there. I'm going to stay with her. Look how good of a job it does as her behind the net. No problems with her. And as she comes through her hit, it's going to stick on her. And as she goes back to the back row, it jumps back to her. Okay, here's another example of a hitter. All right, it's already in focus. She's behind the obstacles, follows her all the way through the hit. Does a great job. Same thing on this other side. We're going to get them as they jump up and hit a nice block. All right, let's take a look at these images. Again, when I'm doing action priority mode, I'm holding down the focus tracking button. I'm not letting go, reacquiring. I'm just letting the camera do the work here to test this out. So right now, I'm focused on this athlete in the center as they're passing serves in pregame. Good time to test this. And And as you see, as we go through, she's in focus. But when the ball moves to the right, you see this other athlete coming in, and she starts doing a digging motion. And right about there, you can see that it recognizes the ball and that she's making the motion. So it's going to focus on this athlete. And that's, again, what action priority mode is supposed to do. This is a great example of that. So essentially, you're letting the camera choose the subject in focus depending on their action and their relationship to the ball. But then later, another game, trying to do the same thing, we notice this happen. Focus back here as she's trying to receive. But then all of a sudden, she goes from totally being in focus to being out. And this athlete's in focus for some reason. And I'm not sure why, because that's clearly a volleyball move. But that's an example of it not working. And then she comes back into focus again. And I think I figured it out when I went up and I started shooting from above. So I'm shooting the serve, and watch the sequence as she does a jump serve. In focus, in focus, in focus. And then right here, for some reason, she goes completely out. And the focus jumps to the people here in the background. And as she makes her jump, she comes back and then she's in focus again. Now, this is something with the R3, with the R5, using traditional head tracking, you won't have this happen. This is a kind of a weird behavior. And it wasn't until I took a picture of our libero doing a serve, and if you notice, she's wearing a white top, no issues. Tack sharp, everything. So between seeing these few examples, I think what's happening is it's just struggling with the background. The fact that her uniform is the exact same color as the background, she gets lost in it. And again, the camera in the autofocus manual, it explains that it's looking at the shape of the athlete and the one's high contrast. So in this situation, it's not working very well. Whereas on another night when we're wearing the white jerseys, it was fine. So that's definitely an issue with volleyball especially. Now, I did see this a little bit with basketball when some of the players were wearing jerseys that were the same color as the padding on the walls behind them. So that's definitely something that can be improved upon with a firmware update, is making that even better. Some examples of net play. And what makes volleyball so hard is that you're tracking an athlete and then the blocking hands come up and stop it. Now, head tracking does a pretty good job of this, but it does get tricked sometimes and jumps to foreground. But I'm telling you, this is pretty impressive what it's doing. It's following her all the way through. You can see she's in focus behind these fingers. There's her eye nice in focus through the whole motion. And then as she goes and turns around to celebrate. Here we have them on the back row, and we're focused on the center athlete. And as she goes to get the ball kind of floats, and then here on the side she jumps in, and it gets there eventually. Like right here is kind of when it gets in focus. So it took a while, and I can understand it's hard for the camera to decide who it's going to. But it did get there eventually. A little bit slow, could be a little bit faster. Here's a good example of what happens at the net. Now, we've got the setter setting a pass, setting, and then you see what happens there is the focus. Once she sets the ball, we see this blocker here, but we don't see the athlete that the ball is going to. So because that doesn't know what to go to, it jumps to the defensive player. And then when it does finally recognize that she's on offense making her volleyball moves, it jumps back to her. And then it does a pretty good job there. And that's something that I did notice happen from time to time. Sometimes it would jump to the foreground. And I wish there was a way to limit, like say, hey, don't focus past the net towards me. Like lock yourself off from there on. So it could kind of mitigate some of those issues. It's another hit from the corner. What's impressive here is that you see how she's still in focus behind the net. It's just still tracking her, and then she goes and digs the ball. And then passed over to the other side. You see right here, she's wearing the same top as the background. There's nothing else. Yeah, this time, no problem. She doesn't disappear and she stays in focus through the whole thing. So it happens from time to time when it jumps back. Really good at focusing on through the net here as she digs it. Now, blocking is the hard thing. And again, in the manual, it explains that one of the motions that it's looking for, the one that it's not looking for, is blocking. And I can understand why. And this is if you come back here, here's why. Because this defender is blocking. So if you told it should look at people hitting the ball and blocking the ball, which one is it going to do? So you have to choose one or the other. So in the way they set up their algorithm, it's the one hitting. So let's go to a situation now where I actually want to shoot our team blocking. Well, it's probably not a good idea to use action priority mode. In fact, what I would do is I would just use spot focus here. Since the blockers really do stay in the same spot and they aren't moving a lot, I would just do my spot focus button and capture this, because it's going to want to, if you see a lot of the player on the opposite side as you're trying to block, you're going to jump to her head because it thinks that that's what you want to focus on, because the priority is hitters. So this is just one of those situations where you have to be aware of what the camera's doing. And that's also why the manual is so helpful, because we didn't understand what was going on in the algorithms before. And now we have at least some insight as to what the priorities are and what the camera is looking to focus on. So we had a nice little set go. And again, this whole time I'm just holding down the focus tracking button. It's getting passed to the corner. It finds her and it locks onto her as she does her hit. Same thing here, but with a middle. It just jumps focus to the middle, locks on her. And then this time it took a little longer. This is where it got tricked for some reason. I think what happened is we were focused here and it never got to the setter. But then it did find her because she's doing that. Once it recognizes she's doing that volleyball motion and the ball's close to her, it's going to focus on her. So after trying it out for several weeks, I have lots of thoughts. First of all, it works. It's not perfect. No system is. But I was surprised at how well it did in different situations. I found action priority mode to be most effective with soccer, which makes sense. I think soccer is, first of all, it's the world's most popular sport. Second of all, it's pretty consistent and the ball is usually going to be visible, and that makes it a little bit easier for the system to work. The least successful was probably volleyball, with basketball somewhere in between, hits and misses. But overall, I was really impressed with the system. If you're a young sports photographer just getting into sports, this is going to be an amazing tool for you. It will get you started, especially with difficult sports like volleyball. Now, if you're a seasoned pro, it may or may not be helpful to you. There were definitely times when I was shooting basketball that it was faster than I could have been on my own. And that shocked me, especially for the first time shooting it. The thing you need to remember is this is just generation 1 of this system. It's going to get better. Here are a few suggestions I have to make the system even better. First of all, the jersey color versus the background. When the camera had a hard time distinguishing the athlete from the background, it struggled with action priority mode, where normal face tracking was just fine. If they can solve that problem or make it better, it will make the whole system far more usable for photographers. Now, my second suggestion comes from the basketball example, where the athlete had the ball in his hands and turned around and the ball disappeared behind him. And the camera, not knowing where the ball was, hunted for it and found it 20 feet away in the background with the player sitting holding one on the bench. That's something we need to work on. Maybe we need to make it so that when the ball disappears, the camera doesn't immediately go and hunt for it, especially 20 feet away. Maybe it just gives it a second unless it knows that there was a pass. That's something I would like to be able to control with customization, depending on the way I shoot and what I'm shooting. Now, customization is an interesting point because I love it. And in fact, all photographers shoot in different ways. And we have different sports that we're shooting, and we have different levels of experience. So Canon, just give me all the customization that you have. Wait. What I worry is that you heard give me a lot of customization. What I said was, give me all the customization that you have. Do you understand? Next, we need an action priority mode for football, or American football. It's one of the most photographed sports, especially here in the US, and it is tough for beginning photographers. Right now, head tracking doesn't do a good job of tracking helmets. It jumps around, it's not sure, a helmet is not a head. And they really could make a mode that specifically works on helmets and focuses on them. And maybe even that could, when you're close up, could offset the focus from the front of the face mask to the eyes so you could see the eyes better. That's something that these cameras always struggle with. Using a ball is going to be really problematic with football because the ball is a weird shape, and depending on what angle you look at the ball, it's a different shape. So maybe the ball isn't as important for football. Imagine a scenario where you're tracking a long pass and you have a receiver and a defender going for the ball. Which athlete should be focused on, right? I'm wondering if action priority mode could recognize specific colors or uniforms or helmets, the same way that it does recognize specific faces when you set people priorities. If I could at the beginning of the game take a picture of the jersey and helmet of the athletes from my team, then during the game it could focus on whoever the athlete is in that frame and track them and not the opposing team. In fact, that would work great with every sport. If you could take a picture of your athlete you're trying to photograph and make that the priority for the camera, it would really help with action priority mode. Another suggestion comes from the volleyball example, where it was focusing on the athletes on my side of the net. I would love to be able to limit the focus points, maybe the foreground focus and the background focus points, so that it doesn't go beyond those. So it won't back focus to the crowd, so it won't foreground focus to the other team. That would be something that would be helpful, not just for action priority mode, but for all of action photography. Another suggestion is to look at eye-controlled focus. If it worked in conjunction with action priority mode, you would just have to move your eye to select the athlete from your team in the photo, and it would just jump to that athlete and stay with them. That's something I think is really exciting. My final suggestion is to add an action priority mode, not for a specific sport, but a specific situation. We need to call it sticky mode. Right now, the camera isn't as sticky as we'd like it to be when it's focusing on one individual. I want to be able to choose an individual, and the focus stays and locks onto that individual no matter what happens, no matter what obstacle, no matter what they do, it stays with that one person. Right now, the stickiness of the camera is more like a post-it note type of stickiness, and we need duct tape. In fact, call it duct tape mode. There are plenty of situations in which having a mode like that would be amazing for us photographers. I'm excited to continue working with the R5 Mark II and the upcoming R1 to see how we can make these settings work the best for all the situations we need to photograph. So if you have any questions, go ahead and hit us up in the comments below, and we'll see you on the sidelines.